Welcome everyone. Today we're going to look at cladograms. I'm going to ask you to draw a cladogram. Tomorrow's test, Thursday. If you're taking the APUSH exam tomorrow, I don't know if that affects this hour or not. Please talk to me after class and we'll make arrangements for you to take the test on Friday. On your test tomorrow, on Thursday, one of the things I'll ask you to draw is a cladogram. Based upon a chart with characteristics, much like you have on the sheet in front of you, I'm going to ask you to construct a cladogram that shows common ancestry and shared derived characteristics. And then also, in addition to that, I'm going to ask you to interpret the cladogram and look, you should be able to draw some comparisons. So remember when we're talking about cladograms, it's kind of like a family tree. So this is our family tree. You, your sister, your first cousin, your second cousin. This is what we would see. Now, these are common ancestors that we can talk about between you and your sister, you and your first cousin, and you and your second cousin. Realize that there are more people that would fit on this second cousin line, right? Because your second cousin also has a set of grandparents, and your second cousin also has a set of parents. So there are going to be some other divisions along the way here, but if we are looking at the relationship of your second cousin to you, not your great aunt, we aren't looking at that stuff. This is what we can see. And as I was talking through cladograms, I kind of came up with this analogy of how do we know common ancestry? How do we know when we look at a cladogram what characteristics the organisms have? So we think of a cladogram as like a series of ramps or tubes or pipes or whatever. We can drop marbles through them. So it's a mental thing. We aren't actually going to drop marbles. But the idea is when we talk about common ancestry, where these cross points are, is if we say, who are you more closely related to, you or your sister, or to you and your sister, or you and your first cousin. If we drop two marbles between you and your sister, where those two marbles will meet is the most recent common ancestor between those two organisms. So you and your sister share the common ancestor of your parents. You and your first cousin drop a marble, they're going to intercept at your parents. That's your most recent common ancestor with your first cousin. Now, who are you more closely related to, your sister or your first cousin?
Sister.
Your sister, because your parents are more recent common ancestor than your first cousin. Okay? Are you related to your first cousin? Yeah, because you share ancestors called your grandparents. Are you related to your second cousin? Yeah, because you have great-grandparents that you share in common. Now, this is a question is kind of tricky to think about. It's not really a trick question, but who is your second cousin most closely related to? Is your second cousin more closely related to you, or is your second cousin more closely related to your first cousin? Or is your second cousin more closely related to you, or is your second cousin more closely related to your first cousin?
They're the same.
They're the same, right? Why? Right? The ancestor that you share in common with your second cousin is your great-grandparents. The ancestor that your second cousin and first cousin share in common is your great-grandparents. So you share a common ancestor with that second cousin. They are equally related. You are equally related to your second cousin as your first cousin is to your second cousin. Okay, just something to kind of keep in mind as we're looking at this. When we start looking at cladograms, we can put derived characteristics on the chart, and this is our one from yesterday. And when we look at these type of cladograms, the boxes represent characteristics. The interpretation of a cladogram should be able to look at common ancestry, much like we just did. So we could go through and say a human and a monkey have a common ancestor right there, and a kangaroo and a human have a common ancestor right there. Now, we have a time scale on our y-axis. This is present day. I have every organism on this at the same time because they all are alive today. If they would have gone extinct, our line would terminate back in time, right? Not at present day, but they're all still here. So if we go human monkey or human kangaroo, this is our time. Which one is more closely related? Choice number, or which one is more recent? Number one or number two? number one, right? Because this is present day. This is a long time ago, but this was a long, long time ago. Okay, so we can look in common ancestry that way. Most recent common ancestors. The other thing we can look at is how many characteristics they have in common if we're looking at characteristics. So all these boxes represent characteristics that these organisms have. An interpretation of this graph, we should be able to go through and say, based upon my cladogram, what characteristics do these organisms have? And some students were struggling with that, so the marble kind of thing worked again. If I say, what characteristics does a kangaroo have? I take my marble and I hold it at the kangaroo and I drop the marble. And gravity is going to take over. So the marble is going to come down, and any box that it rolls through is the characteristic that that kangaroo has. So the kangaroo is a mammal with an amniotic egg, paired legs, vertebrae, and a notochord. If I drop my marble at human, it would go short canine, placenta, mammal, amnion, paired legs, vertebrae, notochord. If I dropped it over here at the lamprey, it only has a notochord, right? A marble doesn't roll uphill. Now we had some forks, we had some divisions here. Same idea, the goldfish is a vertebrate and a notochord. Now the way I drew my lizard and turtle, I added the shell, right? The snapping turtle has a shell, the lizard doesn't have. That is a characteristic that the turtle has that the lizard doesn't. So I drew a branch, and I put a characteristic that differentiated between the turtle and the lizard. So if I drop my marble, the turtle has a shell and an amnion and paired leg vertebrae and notochord, whereas the lizard does not go through that, so therefore doesn't have that characteristic, but has all those. When we look at common ancestry or most related, we can also look at those two and say how many, like if I say I'm going to take a marble and drop it from the kangaroo, it's going to roll through all these, okay? If I drop it from the rat, it's going to go through all these. But if I say how many characteristics do they have in common with one another, so the rat versus the kangaroo, it's only from this ancestor down. So it's they share 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 together. But now if I said, what about the rat and the human? Well, now they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we can look at more common characteristics too. Now, kind of follow the same analogy of my parents, first cousin, second cousin, sister. Who is the kangaroo most closely related? Is the kangaroo more closely related to the turtle? Or is the kangaroo more closely related to the rhesus monkey? And we can say, well, where do these two intercept? Right here. Where do these two intercept? Right here. Okay, so we can go kangaroo. We should be able to say it's more closely related to the rhesus monkey. Fingers crossed. If, however, kind of think about this example again. Who is the kangaroo more closely related to? The monkey, rhesus monkey, or is the kangaroo more closely related to the human? Who's the kangaroo more closely related to, the monkey or the human? Why do you say the monkey? Human. Okay, why do you say the human? Where did the monkey and the kangaroo's marbles overlap? Right here, right? Where does the kangaroo and the human's marble overlap? Right here. Where does second cousin and you overlap versus first cousin and second cousin overlap? Okay. Same kind of idea here as here. The kangaroo is equally related to the human as the kangaroo is to the monkey because they share the common ancestor right here. They're equally related. Is something to keep in mind. So what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to look at this chart that you picked up on the way in class constructing a cladogram review. And I'm going to ask you to draw a cladogram. If you want, there's a bunch of rulers on the front cart that you can, your desk that you can use for a straight edge. It's a diagonal line starting at lower left to the upper right. Make sure you put time, present day is going to be at the top. So considering all these organisms on that list are still alive today, they should all terminate at the end here you put them here, they went extinct a long time ago. You're gonna look for common characteristics, and the thing with the most common characteristics is gonna be in the lower left. Make sure that as you add organisms, think of the marble, and if I drop that marble, as that marble rolls through these, do they have all those characteristics? There is a bit of a twist on this one. There's two organisms, there's two columns. There's two columns that have the same number of characteristics. They're just different characteristics. So we might have to add a fork like this, or we might have to add like another line off the main branch. So something to keep in mind. So I'm gonna give you some time, probably right around 10 minutes or so, to work on this on your own. I'll be walking around and saying, hey, what about this? What about this? Hey, has this got this characteristic? There is a backside for some questions. At some point, we'll say, okay, here's the one that I came up with. There's a few variations, but this is pretty much what you need to have. Okay, so I'm gonna give you about 10 minutes, then we'll spend some time talking about it, and then we'll move on to like the next thing, which is your study guide for you to work on. So I'm gonna show you what I have for my cladogram. Now, just blindly copying this is not gonna be beneficial for you to be able to do this on your test. You need to be able to do this on your test. There's really kind of two variations of this. So I'm putting it there for you to reference, but if you have questions, why, please ask me. Some common mistakes I see is loses leaves. People will put on this common, I call it the main line or the main branch. And the problem with putting loses leaves, say like right here, is if I drop my marble on camel, it would flow through loses leaves, and camels don't have leaves to lose. So what I chose to do is I chose to draw a branch off of the fir tree line, and then I put the loses leaves as a characteristic that only comes on the oak tree branch. The fir tree doesn't have that, so therefore it doesn't go through it. The other option, just for the record, is this is for, is you could go through oak trees. You could have gone oak tree like this, and you could have put the characteristic here of the loses the leaves. You could put it there and then go back here. Because I think shark is the one that was next, and this is the vertebrae. By putting it, oops, I'm talking off the camera. The other thing you could have done is you could have done that. And by putting that branch for oak tree here, using my marble analogy, it will go through the loses leaves and eukaryotic and alive. But when I drop the marble down the shark, it doesn't lose leaves, right? So that works, or that works too as a branch off the fir tree. Now realize that as new organisms are added to our list that we need to classify, we might have to change our criteria. And this whole cladogram might have to be redrawn. But these are the characteristics that fall on the main line, because as I drop my marble, these are the ones that everything has in common. This is really the one exception to what can't be on the main branch. It could be like that, or it could be like this. Again, being picky, this is present day. All of our organisms should be up here, because I saw a couple of people put them like this. And what that would imply, if this is present day and you put bacteria here, that there's no bacteria here today, and they are. That fir trees went extinct, that oak trees went extinct, that hawks went extinct. So again, being slightly picky on that, but that's how we draw these. We can look at relatedness. So who is the hawk more closely related to? The camel, or is the hawk more closely related to the shark? I'm asking you guys, is the hawk more closely related to the camel, or is the hawk more closely related to the shark? To the camel, because it has a more recent common ancestor than this one. We'll look at how many characteristics they share in common, 1, 2, 3, 4, the camel and the hawk, compared to the camel, the shark and the hawk are right here, or 1, 2, 3. Who is the hawk more close? What is the closest relative to the hawk? Wait, don't answer that question. What's the closest relative, first cousin, sister, you, what's the closest relative to your second cousin? Don't say parents, grandparents, or great-grandparents. Who's your second cousin's closest relative here? We talked about this one.
All the same.
They're all the same, right? Because you shared great-grandparents. What's the closest relative of the hawk? They're not all the same, just for the record, but there's more than one. The camel and the hawk, right? I'm sorry, the camel and the human, because they share the common ancestor here. Okay, so these are equally related to the hawk because they share this for the common ancestor. Now, if the question was camel hawk, or I'm sorry, hawk camel or hawk shark, well then it's hawk camel. Okay, but that's that idea. All right, couple of things to wrap up with, and then you're going to have some time. There's a back side of this worksheet that has some questions that you should answer and submit in Canvas. I'm about to put a study guide out for you to work on to help you kind of go through and hit the main highlights of the unit. Study guide, just like every other study guide I've given you all year, the answers are posted within Canvas, but it is a Canvas submission. Make sure you put all 5 pages there. Yesterday, there were 2 different activities that we did in class. One was called building a cladogram. Make sure you, I don't know if I emphasized that, but make sure we make the submission for building a cladogram. It was where we built that. And then the last thing that we are dealing with is the last submission that you were to work on is the molecular biology and phylogeny. And there was a series of questions that I asked you to submit, answer as homework and submit. So there's 2 submissions from yesterday in Canvas. So I'm about to put out your answer, the study guides for you to work on, and the rest of your time is to work. But please, 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 please ask questions so you're ready for tomorrow's test.